This morning early. Seems like when I was coming home from business yesterday, I noticed that everywhere I had a vote blue sign in one area, they were gone and a Trump sign was in their place. Now, I said I can either get up early and go fix that, or I can study up on Andre Norton uh, and provide meaningful input to Cliff's show this morning.
Well, you made the right decision, I think. But that's quite a move for the "you will not replace us" crowd to replace all those signs.
Hell yeah! And when my bicycle accidentally ran over one of the Trump signs, I looked at it and I thought about it and I said, "No, I can't let that happen." So I gripped a Trump sign with my hands and stood it back up.
Did you have hand sanitizer?
No, but I tell you what, I did just need a little doggy bag uh, because of the nausea it provided. The um, it was a good morning. Other than that, though, those of you who follow me may have known that I spent yesterday in the ER with my wife, bless her heart, Susie. Um, she is much better, and now I've got a helmet for her. She was riding her little red cart, and it got off center, and she tipped over and banged her head on the street. And not a thing you want to see is when the gutters it's pooling in the gutter, but you say, yeah. Now, so that's why we're late, and that's why I'm wearing coveralls. But today we have a good thing.
Let's hope.
Cliff is here to take you guys on a wondrous journey into the world of there. Who is this Tolkien character you were talking about?
Obscure British writer. I'll tell you about him later.
Oh, I know. I tried to read him once, but I found myself reading 38 pages of this one guy walking through the woods talking to a ladybug or something. I don't know, but
well, he's well known for his critical essay, "The Monsters and the Critics," on Beowulf. That's probably his most well-known work.
But I'm going to leave you with these two wonderful people here, and I'm going to bug out and go check on the world.
All right, Bob. Thank you.
So I said two wonderful people. Which two of us are wonderful?
There's a 4-woman band from Austin, Texas called Two Nice Girls. Anyway.
There you go.
But let me introduce my guests. They are both returning guests, but they could get introductions anyway. I have with me 2 award-winning authors. Andrew L. Roberts is the author of numerous short stories that appear in numerous places and anthologies and some magazines. He's also a poet who has actually sold poetry for money, which puts him in the elite top 1% of poets in the world. He has also, on the poetry side, released a novel-length poem, an epic poem, or novel in verse, if you will, about World War I called Durham and Rose. It is the only thing I can compare it to is if Wilfred Owen had written an epic love poem, it might come out something like Durham and Rose. So, and several collections of poetry. He is currently working on a book called The Avenue of Bones, set about a samurai in the Tokugawa shogunate. That is the first of a projected trilogy, and we'll see where that goes. Richard Chwedyk is the author of numerous SOAR, as in dinosaur stories, about genetically engineered dinosaurs that have been appearing over the years in, I think they're all in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, or are they in other?
They're all in the mag. Yes, they have.
And one of them, Bronte's Egg, won the Nebula Award. And he is also a professor. He teaches at Columbia College in Chicago. He has taught creative writing. He has taught writing science fiction. And he is currently teaching a apparently very well received course on J.R.R. Tolkien, which brings us to the subject today. I thought today would be just a good day to look at some of our favorite writers, and I initially suggested J.R.R. Tolkien and Ursula K. Le Guin, because there could be some nice comparing and contrasting there. Andrew wanted to add Andre Norton, which is a wonderful addition. So that's what we're going to talk about. The subject for today is Tolkien, Le Guin, and Norton. So why don't we start with Norton? Andy, did you want
Yeah,
to talk about her?
yeah. There's basically, I mean, most of us who looks like our peerage, who were teenagers in the 70s and early 80s.
I bring that up because in the very first session of my fantasy writing workshop, I caught one of my students reading. It was a coverless. It was a stripped cover version of Andre Norton's Starborn, and I said, "Where did you get that? And why are you reading it?" And he's like, "I got it at a secondhand bookstore in Wicker Park, Myopic Books." And it's like, "I really love it." And I said, "Good for you. I'll see if I can find you some more Andre Norton." And he said, "Yeah, well, they said that they've got, somebody who's like an estate sale or something. And so there's Andre Norton coming." And, but, to have a student just reading Starborn, in class before we get started, it was like, this is a good sign. This is going to be a very good class. Okay, I'm
Liam's
sorry.
notes that Tolkien, Le Guin, and Norton sounds like a law firm, but it's a law firm you don't want to mess with.
There's one book that the reason I bring in, Andrea Norton is there was one book she did that I don't know if it was popular at all. It was one of the off branches of her Witch World books, which were kind of weird. That was that sword and sorcery science fiction mashup thing. But
that was back when you couldn't really publish fantasy unless
yeah.
you pretended it was science fiction, like Pern and Witch World and
So
Darkover.
she wrote one book called The Year of the Unicorn, which blew me away when I read it in high school. And I read it right after I had read The Lord of the Rings. And the reason it stuck is that, you have these were riders, shape-shifting warriors. A war is already over, and you have these warriors who are getting brides because there was an agreement that they would serve in the war if they were given, brides. And one of the misfit were riders wins a bride, and she's not what she seems. She's actually a witch, and it's just a great book. I don't want to give it anything away about that, but the strong female character was born in fantasy right there, and she's just great. And then the subjective hero, with quotation marks, Harold, he is totally secondary to her, but he rises to his occasion. It's a great book, and it's overlooked whenever people talk about, fantasy from that period. So anyway, that's Norton.
Yeah,
So,
Norton as a writer is often
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
overlooked and combed over, partly because of the volume of books of hers that had come out, and that a number of them had come out from Ace, and so it wasn't the hot thing. It wasn't the Heinlein, it wasn't the Alfred Bester and that. But about 10 or 12 years, and I bypassed a lot of Andre Norton for that reason. It wasn't until as recently as maybe 10, 12 years ago that I started like going back to these books. You get so many old guys like us, who's like, oh, such and such a book, does it stand up? And uh, it's like, I don't even know if it stands up because I didn't read it the first time. But I started reading Norton's books and was immediately drawn in. I said, yes, I can read as many of these as you can throw on my table. I am loving Andre Norton's books.
So when I was a kid, the science fiction paperback section at bookstores under N was extremely large because John Norman and Andre Norton were right next to each other and were super popular, and only alphabetically were they right next to each other. They couldn't be further apart. But I originally started reading Andre Norton because the library had a ton of Andre Norton. And at that time in my life, I was pretty young. I was like one-digit ages. I didn't know any Andres. And I knew from the cover copy of the books that Andre Norton was a woman. And so I thought Andre was a girl's name for years until I found out it was a pen name that was a man's name.
I renamed her in my head to Andrea.
That's funny. She
As an
legally
Andrew, I
changed her
can get
name
away
to
with
Andre Norton, at one point. But one book that struck me that I'm going to mention of Andre Norton's is a slim little paperback that isn't connected to the Witch World or any of her other series, and it is Here Abide Monsters. That's the dog.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't have the paperback handy, but it's in the other room. And that cover, first of all, very striking. It's got it's got pteranodons and a castle and a jeep. How cool is that? And the cover actually is accurate, right? It's about all the people who vanish on hiking trails. They go to this alternate world which has Arthurian mythology and flying saucers and dinosaurs and all sorts of stuff. And it was my gateway drug to Andre Norton's writing. And I'm like, I want more, but it was epic, an epic in like 180 pages, right? Of a paperback. So unlike, for example, this epic.
Yes.
Very weighty tome. This is the version, current lovely edition, illustrated by Tolkien. And I'm reading it to my older kids, having read them The Hobbit previously. So, let's talk a little bit about that. Tolkien is the opposite extreme, right? He wrote very few books he wrote a lot more after he died. Before
he wrote them before he died.
Yeah. He's got that in common with L. Ron Hubbard. He managed to write book one of a decalogy before he died, and then the other 9 after he died. But anyway, I digress.
It's funny, when I first encountered Tolkien, I was in Boy Scouts, and one of the guys in the senior patrol, on his backpack, he had painted Elvish and the spiral version of Minas Ithil from the old first paperbacks, right? And I asked what it was, and he told me, and he never mentioned elves. He never mentioned elves, and there's a reason that this is important. And then when I was in the 8th grade, one of my best friends, John DeFord, I went to his house, and he was showing me his brand new Tolkien calendar with all the illustrations by Tolkien, right? This is the one
before the Hildebrandt calendar?
Yeah, before Tim Kirk even. This is the first 2 calendars were by Tolkien. And he told me about it. And again, he didn't mention that there were elves. And so I'm a freshman in high school after this, and a guy who would become one of my best friends in the world, in English, we had to talk about books. And I was deeply, deeply buried in Edgar Rice Burroughs at the time. And he gets up there and he starts talking about this book about elves. and I'm like just shaking my head, man. Where are the Martians? And so
elves are just Vulcans on
Earth. That's the thing. So my older brother, that year for Christmas, he told me he was going to get me the Lord of the Rings, and he started telling me about it, and I was just thinking, elves, come on. And so I went to my friend, okay, tell me about these elves. And these elves were not like the elf on the shelf. And then I saw the Tim Kirk calendar that had, Spock's father was Celeborn. And suddenly the elves seemed kind of cool. So that when I was talking with another friend who was reading Watership Down, I said, rabbits? And so it was a time of change in my life.
At least it wasn't a rabbits and elves book.
Yeah. So, but what was really weird is, so I dove into The Hobbit, read it. like you wouldn't believe, on Christmas Day. Read it right through, and then went right into Lord of the Rings, and I was completely hooked. And but then there was nothing else except for the Tolkien Reader, which was just Tom Bombadil and on fairy stories and stuff for years until the Silmarillion came out. But the thing that's funny about the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, is there was nothing like it because it was high fantasy before there was high fantasy, and fantasy other than him was sword and sorcery,
Mhm.
and
Which
so
was undergoing its own revolution due to
right.
Michael Moorcock.
So
This is the
well,
one-year
yeah, and I
revolution.
hadn't found Michael Moorcock yet. That's a whole other addiction.
Hmm.
So, but
Well, there was also the paperback introduction of Robert E. Howard's Conan books,
yeah,
which I think was helped uh, 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 it helped generate American publishers to be interested. We need you know more books with muscled guys with swords on there,
yeah.
and it's like this Moorcock guy seems to write a lot of that. Let's put his stuff into print. And it was sort of the paperback rediscovery of Robert E. Howard, and
Yeah.
with
Thank
the
you, Lynn
strong
Carter, for that.
thank you, Lynn Carter, because Lynn Carter also brought in the whole uh, um, adult fantasy series from Ballantine,
Valentine, yeah.
Yeah,
and
just rediscovering classic literature from the 19th and early 20th century.
yeah, like
King of
E.R.
Elfland, Potter, yeah.
Lord
William
Dunsany.
Morris, E.R. Edison,
Yeah.
all of these folks who, in a sense, are Tolkien predecessors, and that no one had heard about it before until Lynn Carter starts running through his library saying, "What about this? What about this? What about this?"
But
And
it's funny. Everyone was looking. Everyone that I knew was into Tolkien, which wasn't very many people really in my high school. But we were all hunting for something like Tolkien, and we were the Warmore Boris. That's got to be something like Tolkien. No, it wasn't like Tolkien.
it wasn't, no.
Gnome
Well,
Grass.
another thing that was promised on the paperback cover to be something like Tolkien
Yeah,
was on Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea
yes,
at the time
Yeah.
trilogy.
Mhm.
And it was nothing like Tolkien, but it was cool in its own way.
it was like Tolkien in one essential way, which is what I
Beautifully
was going
written.
to lead into. You had sword and sorcery, and you had fantasy of a different nature, and those are two branches in our genre, right? One branch leads to uh, more character-driven, almost innocent stories, and the others go right to grim dark and George R. R. Martin, and to the point where I'm still saying, "Come on, I need more Tolkien. Where's Tolkien?" So I've been living in the histories of Middle Earth for a long time, uh, but there's that essential difference between Le Guin and Tolkien on one side and everything else on the other, except for the ones that are just copies. Uh, there's
Of which
Tolkien
there are a lot now.
at its heart is about goodness.
Hmm.
And even in the Earthsea books, right? It's about goodness. Ged has to come to terms with who he really is, his shadow, and goodness to find his goodness. And I don't think you can have Le Guin without Tolkien. She even steals words from him. She has King's foil growing in Earthsea. Um,
Sure.
Hmm.
but
Well, Le
But,
Guin has written several essays about Tolkien, and one of them had to do um, with sort of the cadence of the language of Tolkien.
yeah,
Um, and so there's obviously a strong influence. I mean, Le Guin was probably reading Tolkien before the rest of us saw the Ace paperbacks sitting up on the spinner racks in the drugstores and grocery stores, which is, I think is, you know, when I teach the Tolkien class, it's like I'm sort of like the anti-Tolkien teacher. My predecessor was a professor of Slavic languages, And she was just fascinated with all of the um, matters of language, the linguistic constructions, and trying to get everybody to look back at Icelandic Eddas and things like that. And I'm a writer, and um, I say, and I start every class asking, how the hell did you get here? Why are you taking a 3 semester hour course, on a guy who died 51 years ago, and what brings you here outside of the fact that maybe you had an open slot in your schedule at Friday at 12:30, and some of the comments have changed over the years. One that came back strongly in this time, as I started the class, was that you know I grew up with Tolkien. I mean, my parents, read me The Hobbit, and you know how yes, you know how you know for various holidays, like Christmas and whatever, there's certain sort of ritual movie experiences and that, I've got, at least half a dozen students, who, when Christmas comes by, dad, or and in the case of a couple this time, grandpa, pulls out his complete Lord of the Rings, the final cut, the ones with all the extras on it.
The extended
And
editions.
yes, yeah, exact. I'm sorry. For some reason, it's too early in the morning. I'm still trying to
And
reach
you're
for
on
my
Central
coffee cup.
Time.
I'm on Central Time, and I'm one of these people who, when I see sunrise, it's because I've spent the whole night working on writing, and as I see it's getting lighter in the sky, I sort of say, I think we'd better head to bed now. But anyway, so that there's a family tradition going on. Everybody sits around, watches Lord of the Rings at Christmas time, or it's the book that connects them to their parents, and not necessarily in a negative way. Because there are some kids who'd say, if I if I hear one more thing about Sam Gamgee, or if my dad quotes Gandalf one more time, I'm leaving home. I'm filling up my
I have
bag.
to watch that Leonard Nimoy music video anymore.
Oh yeah, no. We did that one time, as a final project. Um, one of my students, as part of their final project, subjected the class to the Leonard Nimoy song, and sort of threw into the class why was this done.
Cruel and unusual punishment.
It was, but
Bilbo.
mhm.
Bilbo.
But my approach to Tolkien is not on the scholarly side. The reason the Peter Jackson films worked as well is that I think that even though he changed a lot, and a couple times we have looked at certain scenes of the way Tolkien wrote them and the way that Jackson filmed them, and we say that he's true to the story, and it's the story which still compels us. It's the story which keeps those books in print
One of
and
my
translate.
favorite Peter Jackson moments is the lighting of the signal fires.
Hmm.
It's like a paragraph in the book, and it's this epic, swooping, virtual crane shot, like, across the mountains from Gondor to Rohan, and
Hmm.
it's just wonderful. The way he
Hmm.
makes it visual, and the other genius of Peter Jackson is he takes these underground locations like the Goblin Caves in the Misty Mountains or Moria, and expands them visually into these huge vaults with columns and gigantic caverns, and and which is not how they're depicted in the books, and
Yeah, they're
but
claustrophobic.
but it is a cinematic way of showing the epic scale, right? Like just the way he does the bridge at Khazad-dûm and all of that.
Yeah, the one that I use, and I lie in some ways. I connect Tolkien with is his interest in medieval literature, especially Beowulf, but a number of Old English poems like The Wanderer, um, and it's the note of melancholy in there, but um, there are a couple places where uh, uh, Theoden and Aragorn, paraphrase lines from The Wanderer. But while doing that, I ran into a tape recording that Tolkien made reading the scene, Theoden's speech before they go into battle, and it's arise, arise, or it is a Roman, and there are certain changes in what Theoden says in the book and what Jackson has placed in there. Um, but the other thing is that you know, when Tolkien reads that scene, he uses a high dramatic voice, arise, arise, and um, when Jackson films it, Theoden is on his horse and he's in motion, and the camera keeps cutting back to to Eowyn and to Mary and to a number of other faces. And in doing that, Jackson builds up sort of the tension, the fear that doesn't necessarily connect back to Tolkien's story, but maybe even steps even farther back. The fear of facing battle and the fear of facing incredible odds that probably dates back to his experience in France in the First World War in Ardennes. It's a marvelous thing. The film gives up trying to keep the secret identity of Eowyn, and as now I've
Durnhelm.
Durnhelm. Thank you. I've got a number of these D names that were stuck in my head, and it's Durnhelm. Um, oh, one of our last fall, one of our students, or excuse me, last spring, one of our students has never seen the Peter Jackson movies and was just reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. And she had reached the section where Mary, was connected with this Durnhelm character. And she's, because I ask the students every week, so what's catching your attention in your reading and all that? And she said, well, Mary's with this other, soldier character, this Durnhelm, and suddenly, like, you know, 24 eyes are lighting up, and I sort of raised my hand. I was like, "No, no, don't tell her. don't give it away. I know it's impossible. There's
Yeah.
the movies out there and all of that, but if
There's
she's
somebody
managed,
unspoiled. Let them be unspoiled.
yeah, if there's somebody out there for whom this is completely a new experience, don't mess it up."
Right?
But Jackson has given up on that. He knows that on film it's going to be difficult to hide the identity.
You got
So
the same actor either way. Yeah.
yeah, but but he uses the opportunity that when we get the close-ups of both Eowyn and Mary, the the fear that is in their face is like, look, there's this army of orcs. They're savage. That we're about to march right into them, and the fear is so strongly captured by the actors. Um, and then when Theoden hits hits the high note on the speech, and they suddenly like, yeah, let's go. And that transition from there, we're riding to our death. Yeah, that's is beautifully captured. And so, in some ways, the spirit of the story is more strongly conveyed in the way Jackson shot it than if he had just tried to follow the novel line for line.
There was a really serious difference though in the writers of Rohan, especially Eowyn in the books, is they were in love with death. Eowyn wanted nothing more than to die in battle.
Mm-hmm.
So I never got a sense of any fear from her in the books. And she had to read that her story arc was discovering a desire to live.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because the writers are in battle and they're singing while they're slain and they're despoiling their enemies and all this stuff. And yet this is coming from a guy who served in the Somme,
Mm-hmm.
which you want to singing in battle, and this guy his experience was the absolute opposite. And I've always held that one of the reasons he wrote the Lord of the Rings wasn't to satisfy a public. I think he was doing it to connect with Christopher, who was in World War II.
Yeah, he was
His
in the
younger
RAF.
Yeah,
he's
and
coming
I
from
think
chunks.
it was his lifeline to his son through much of, because he kept sending pieces for Christopher to read,
Yes.
and so there's that weird juxtaposition of veterans and soldiers, and then in the books this one group of soldiers that were in love with war.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very strange. As a kid, I didn't realize it until I was older, but I did know that Eowyn was seriously scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and but the connection between Tolkien and first of all his own experiences in 1915 at the Somme and all of that, but that was the war to end all wars, and here was his son, his youngest son, in fact, who's fighting yet another war,
Yeah.
to end all wars, and it's sort of the pain and irony of that situation. I think informs a lot of what, because he's writing this at that time.
Yeah.
He's started writing it roughly somewhere between probably around 1938 or so, and it takes him 11 or 12 years to finish, which covers the entire Second World War. So,
Which leads to the scene that gets cut out of the movie.
mm-hmm,
The scouring of the Shire, and
mm-hmm.
the soldiers come home and everything is different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, I have heard that there are Tolkien groups, and I will not mention any names or anything like that, where they almost like a debate question they pose: scouring of the Shire, is this part of the canon or not? And it's like, first of all, I want to know what they mean by the canon, and then
It's in my
secondly,
copy of Return of the King. I mean,
it's and the whole point is that remember that this is it's foreshadowed when Sam gets to to look into the glass,
Yeah.
that there's trouble there, and as a matter of fact, that's one of Sam's most difficult moments, is that the Shire's in trouble. I've got to go back, and then he remembers Mr. Frodo.
Well, and
I Yeah.
Galadriel's gift,
Hmm.
the soil, the soil from Lothlorien, and the seed for the Malorn tree.
Hmm. Yeah,
He
and it
knew.
mm, it also undoes a lot of the premises that because supposedly Michael Moorcock famously tries to undo Tolkien by saying this is all uh, 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 yeah, English Midland conservative
he's not a
viewpoint.
fan of the Lord of the Rings, but he does point out that he met Tolkien and
Mm.
Tolkien was really nice to him.
Mm.
And so,
Well, Tolkien was really nice to everyone.
yeah, so and very
I mean,
encouraging,
he would
and
get hundreds of letters from these Yanks, with all these questions, and it was like I'd love to answer all of them. I just don't have the time. I'm nearly 80 years old, but he was always a very polite, kindly sort of person. Now, the other thing is that I'm just going to bring up one other thing, and I'm going to shut up. But you asked me about Tolkien. It's like I spent a semester talking about Tolkien. This is the short version, but uh, uh,
and we don't even have to pay tuition. This is great.
boy, and you're so lucky because the Columbia tuition is so overpriced. You're getting a hell of a deal here. But
It may be overpriced for other
uh,
courses, but for your course,
you know,
it's a bargain.
we went. Ted Chiang at a talk said that fantasy novels are about something disturbs paradise, and then it disturbs the status quo, and then hero and friends, or whatever combinations thereof, go off and fight the adversary, and then they come back and everything goes to status quo again. And if the you can't read The Scouring of the Shire, those sections of Lord of the Rings, and then suddenly say, oh, we go back and everything is status quo again. Because as much as they would like it to be status quo, it's not. And somebody said, oh, Tolkien really never uses irony a lot, and it's like the way that Return of the King ends, is not, oh, they get on the Grey Havens, the boat goes away, everyone waves goodbye at the end. We stay with Sam, you know. Sam goes back with Merry and Pip, and Merry and Pippin's for once say almost nothing, and they part friends in that. And then Sam goes home, and his wife's making dinner, and he's got his daughter on his knee, and then he says, "Well, I'm back." But that back is so full of irony. Everything that has happened, Sam hasn't forgotten it. He hasn't erased it from his memory. That I'm back is almost more of a wish than it is a statement. And in a sense, it underscores how much has changed, even in the Shire. From the first pages of the Fellowship, and it's
Yeah.
more remarkably insightful about
I
battles and
think
change and all of that.
Tolkien could not believe in a world after going through World War One and watching World War II. I don't think he could believe in a world where these people leave this idyllic, rural England, go fight a huge war that changes everything, and come back and it hasn't touched the Shire, right? Like,
Well,
no, right? Like, it's gonna affect everything,
it's funny.
and
It's
and
the status quo.
yeah,
The status
and
quo.
and
The
and,
status
and
quo.
really,
The
yeah,
status quo in Middle Earth was death and war, except in the Shire because the Dunedain were protecting
we're
it.
protecting it. Yes, unbeknownst to them.
It's like I've always felt like it's Tolkien would hate metaphor, right? If I was to do an analogy, right? But the hobbits are young people; they're children,
Mhm.
and they go and they grow up, and then they come home, and home is messed up, and it's like
Mhm.
Tom Wolfe sneaking in, right? You can't go home again.
I
But
was about to bring up Thomas Wolfe. Yes,
yeah, but
yeah,
they restore the Shire with the help left by the elves, and
Mhm.
the Shire is then protected again because King Elisir says, "No, no, no, no big people go in this area," and eventually, even though it's not in the chapter, it's in the appendices. Sam leaves. He was a ring bearer. He has to
Mhm.
leave too,
he's the
and
last one. Does he go on
Arwen
the same
Mhm.
boat as Círdan? Do they go together? I think.
probably,
Yeah,
and
no.
Arwen. She has
Yeah.
her love of her life, has her children, and fades by herself in the Lothlorien.
Hmm.
I mean, these are sad things. That little bit there, that really echoes into the rest of his writings, like the Children of Húrin and the Lays of Beleriand. Lays of Beleriand, by the way, is, I think, Tolkien's best stuff. Especially the stuff written as epic poetry, or that is just this is really big and pretty. But the Lays of Beleriand is his absolute most gorgeous writing, and I don't know how many people actually bother to read it. Certainly won't ever be made into a movie. So,
I don't know.
It won't be made into a movie.
They're working on the appendices and the unfinished tales on Amazon Prime right now.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. It's my favorite Tolkien fan fiction.
No, that's where Christopher Tolkien like physically rises from the grave. This must stop.
Yeah.
As a final project, one of my students did he did a PowerPoint presentation, and I was looking at the PowerPoint presentation beforehand, and it was like the last few slides are all screwed up, and so I messaged him and said, I think you had a problem sending this over. He says, trust me. Yeah. And so he makes this PowerPoint presentation for the class for Tolkien related non-fungible NFTs. So he's got a currency that's called a cram. After the the little bread things in the Hobbit and that, and there's one that is like a Frodo, and then there's one that's a Gandalf, and the Gandalf one looks almost exactly like the Frodo, except there's a little scribbled beard on it. That's all there is. And then he starts talking about the sort of a electronic currency, and suddenly the PowerPoint presentation goes all twisted up in that, and he had one of his friends dressed up as Gandalf come into the classroom, and wave his stick and says, "This must stop," and drags the student out. And of course, the student gets a round of applause, a standing ovation, and I didn't know it was happening, so it was like the first final project I had scheduled. It was right up at the top. And then I said, "Okay, who's going next?" And knowing like, can you top this? But as one of the reasons why we do final projects. I'm in an art school. I've got people who are film majors and costume majors and theater majors and all sorts of things, and it's sort of like, I want to see how you interpret Tolkien from the point of view of your own interest in your own major. And so I get all sorts of really wonderful, crazy stuff like that.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because it's one of my. I have a love-hate relationship with the movies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few parts in the movies I think are wonderfully done, but it's Lembas and Cram. The books are Lembas, the movies are Cram. There's a meanness about like Peter Jackson. He really wanted the watcher at the gates of Moria to grab the pony. He really did. But I just lost my thought.
You have a love-hate relationship.
Yeah. So, and the reason is, you say you've been talking about the Tolkien for how many years now with the class?
Oh, must be about 4 or 5 years now.
I've been talking about Tolkien for 50 years. And drawing pictures.
Yeah, and
I think Rich has been talking about Tolkien longer.
Yeah, because I mean, the reason why I started teaching the Tolkien class was because Professor Tuzar, during the pandemic, just sort of said, "That's it, I'm out. I'm 80 years old. I've got a book."
What I was going to say is, but doing paintings and drawings too, and there are lots of people doing paintings and drawings. I did most of my stuff in pen and ink. Cliff actually has a painting I did a long time ago of a ring wraith.
Yeah, it's
And that
spooky.
I'm embarrassed by. But
It's good stuff.
ever since the movies came out, everyone likes to draw and do their pictures. It all looks like the movie stuff. So
Yes.
it's like I like going back and sending messages to Ted Nesmith. Let me see what you got.
I honestly, I
I
still like a lot of the visual imagery from the Ralph Bakshi version, and
Yeah,
some of the
I have a
scenes.
like
Peter
the
Jackson
yeah.
adapted
I have a
scenes from that into his movies, like
Mhm.
the Nazgul standing over the beds full of fake people and doing that. That was straight out of Ralph
Mhm.
Bakshi's.
He stole the
Yeah.
shot of Proudfoot with the feet and the
Yeah,
but
Yeah, I have
yeah,
a
he
I have
did.
a traditional animation major who loves the Ralph Bakshi versions, and 2 years ago, my favorite adaptation of Tolkien said one of my students was the Rankin Bass Hobbit. So it is and these are not like old college students coming back in,
No,
and
my interest,
these are all
Tolkien,
mhm,
there was a magazine called Children's Digest by Reader's Digest,
mm,
and they had
mhm,
illustrated stories, and they took Riddles in the Dark out of The Hobbit,
mm.
used pre-production illustrations from the Rankin Bass yet to be released Hobbit, so black and white done in that style, and
Yeah,
over 2 issues published Riddles of the Dark, and I was riveted,
yeah.
riveted, you know. I
this
was
is
like second grade or something like that. I
this
mean,
is
it
what
was
this is one of my prized possessions from when I was 13.
Whoa. Yeah,
ooh.
Nicole Williamson reading The Hobbit.
yeah.
And do you have this, Cliff?
I do not.
Do you have a way of transferring vinyl to
I
digital?
might be able. I have a friend who has that
I'll
stuff.
loan this to you if you want. It is Nicole Williamson's reading of The Hobbit is just brilliant, especially the scene when Thorin says farewell to Bilbo.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's my favorite Tolkien artist.
Yeah, he's a good one. So,
Well,
I want to talk a little bit more about Le Guin because we've
Yeah,
been talking a lot about Tolkien, which is understandable.
there's a
Given,
lot of Tolkien to talk about.
yeah,
Talking
there's a
about
lot
a
of Le
lot of
Guin to talk
Tolkien.
about. So, I'm going to start with Earthsea, of which there are
Mhm.
now 6 books. There were 3 when I started reading it. Wizard of Earthsea is a great book, but I want to talk about Tombs of Atuan, right?
and Tihanu.
Yeah, and Tahanu. Wizard of Earthsea, she has a male protagonist, and when she was asked later about that, she was just like, "Well, that's what people wrote, so that's what young me wrote, right?" But then, you have this story that is my favorite Earthsea book. You have this story about a young man going off and becoming a powerful wizard, and yeah, mine is autographed too. The first time I met Le Guin was on the Tahanu tour. So anyway,
Arguably the best fantasy book ever written.
could be. It's on. Yeah, I mean it's top 10 for sure. And so she does this story that was kind of mainstreamy in a way. I mean, there was no fantasy genre, but she did write something like Tolkien. And then time to write a sequel, and she completely different, right? Ged doesn't show up until the end, and it's all about this young woman who's sacrificed to evil gods and what her life is like, and it's not a male adventure story, right? And then the third one comes back to Ged, but in an unexpected way, and then years happen, and then like Douglas Adams, she wrote a 4th book in the trilogy, and that was Tahanu, which goes back to the heroine of Tombs of Atuan, who is now middle-aged, elderly.
He's old.
She's old, but she's on the cusp, and she's got an adult son, and she's had a life, and
Yeah.
she's now like sort of living, and she's adopted a little girl that, as Ursula Le Guin said on that tour, would be screwed in any universe, in any world. Right? She had been damaged by fire, and she was missing an eye, and part of her skin was not there, and
He
she
was
was,
abused before even
yeah, and abused before that, and yeah, and she takes this little girl and adopts her, and it's about that,
The
and
real world invaded Earthsea
it
in
did,
that book.
right, in the same way that the scouring of the Shire, the real world invaded the Shire, right? And it was the other thing I find very striking about Earthsea, other than the sheer maturity of the later books, is that it is literally a universe built on words, right? She's writing words about a fantasy world, which words create the world, right? The Lord of the Rings was created by song. The Middle Earth was created by song. The Valar and the Maya and the unnamed beings of Eru created the whole universe by singing about it. And in Earthsea, it's about words. Everything's true name gives you power over it, right? And so that there's some interesting parallels there. I also, we're not going to much touch on the science fiction aspect of all these authors, but well, at least Norton and Le Guin. But I do want to say that the short novel *The Lathe of Heaven* is my all-time
You
favorite
got it.
with Le Guin. And if people have not read *The Lathe of Heaven*, go read *The Lathe of Heaven*. And then after you've read the book, the PBS made-for-TV movie from the 70s is out of print on DVD, but it is up on YouTube in its entirety, and especially the DVD extra, which is like this 20-minute interview with Ursula K. Le Guin at the time, is also up on YouTube and well worth checking out. Not to be confused with the subsequent miniseries from the 90s that is garbage.
But I think you secretly like the original version from PBS because of the Beatles reference.
That's not a secret. But the other reason I like it is the sea turtle aliens, of course.
Yeah.
Which are not in the remake.
What's the alien's name?
I forget, but it rolls right off the tongue when the
I always think of Abba Zaba something or another.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, but the unfortunately the DVD release, they didn't have the rights to the Beatles version, so they substituted a cover version of "With a Little Help from My Friends." But when it was first broadcast, I was a kid watching with my parents, and it was the Beatles, changing the universe literally. It was just lovely. They were the trigger.
That's one of my favorite novels.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. It's a Taoist novel, and one of the things that's beautiful, unlike Sauron, who is objectively evil in all the ways that evil can be evil, very self-centered. It's all about him, right? And I'll leave that to the viewer to determine if that has any relation to modern politics. In *The Lathe of Heaven*, the antagonist is wanting to make the world better, genuinely trying to help,
intentions.
The best intentions. He's just going about it wrong and causing problems.
I mean,
he's trying so hard.
I mean, the marvelous thing about the novel itself is that it's not just that he's going about it wrong, but that almost, I guess it does sort of relate to the idea of the Ring of Power. When Gandalf, says that, if I possess the Ring of Power, I'd probably be worse than Sauron. And Galadriel similarly says that if I were to take the ring, what you love in me would no longer be there. That if you grant one person the opportunity to change the world for everyone, you were probably, for a large number of those folks, creating a hell. And that one of the only things that makes the world as tolerable as it is that no one has that ability. And somewhere at the base of the lathe of heaven is that. And in some ways, it has a political twinge, but it also transcends politics, because it doesn't necessarily have to be. What makes the world different is not necessarily going to be done politically anyway. It could be done any number of ways. And the one person given the wish, singing like um if I ruled the world, it's like, good thing, good thing you don't, or that any one of us does. And that's one of the marvelous, beautiful, messages at the bottom of the Lathe of Heaven, and why it's one of my favorite of her novels.
Now you must not give me the ring, Frodo. I'd be tempted to do good with it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it cannot do good. It cannot.
Following Tihanu in the Le Guin books, I think I always looked at Tihanu and the other Wind are the most autobiographical of Ursula Le Guin's works, and also the most loving. Um, there's the way the other Wind begins. There's the mender, the guy who can fix things. He's done something without meaning to, that's creating havoc, which was he's dreaming about his dead wife. And there's that reoccurrent theme from, I think it's from The Farthest Shore, where there's a wall, and on one end of the wall is the living, on the other side of the wall is the dead, and his wife appears at the wall, and they kiss over the wall, and that begins to undo everything. And that's kind of like the generating, we're trying to fix things, and then the other part of it is Ged has been broken at the end of The Farthest Shore, right? He's not a wizard anymore, and he's not a man anymore. And he has to heal, and he goes up to Ogion's place, right? And he becomes whole when he finally is allowed to love. And it's funny because Tianu, or not Tianu, but what's her name? The main character from the Tombs of Atuan.
Also begins with
She has already had a whole life. She's married. She's had a son, and she actually she she basically teaches Ged how to be a human being and to be a man and to love. And it's funny because at the end of the Tombs of Atuan, she considers stabbing Ged after they flee, right?
Tanar.
That's it. But I've always loved those two books together because they're fantasy, but they're the most realistic in terms of humanity. And that's something that I try to do when I'm writing is I'm concerned about humanity. And Tolkien was concerned about humanity, even if it was as an elf. Still can't get over the elves when I was a kid. But
nor could Sam. I mean, one of the impulses is like, I'm going to see elves. I'm going with Frodo. We're going to see elves.
Tolkien said how Sam
and elephants.
Sam was based on his aide, right? When he was
Batman.
Yeah. And
the whole idea of Batman in general in the First World War.
But the guy comes home at the end of the book, right, by him to be with his family. I've often wondered if Tolkien, after the war, ever looked up his Batman. Did he ever hear from him? Did he ever? Because they were together.
That's a great question. That is a really great question. I'm going to have to go digging to find out.
Yeah, I just. But there's that, I don't know. He was an officer. There's that classism in England, but I would think he'd have to.
This is where Tolkien, in a sense, got his experience of Britain outside of the class system. I mean, he'd been public school and then Oxford and then in the battlefields of that. And it's something that's reflected in Lord of the Rings, that it's the grunts. Those are the folks in a sense that you have to rely on.
There's one really sad.
Most of the officers, are more like Bertie Wooster. If they don't have a Jeeves or somebody to help them out.
There's one really sad and likely possibility is that Batman didn't survive the war. And that's why Tolkien brings him home as Sam at the end.
That could be, and because as far as Tolkien's school friends, um,
Yeah.
out of 6 of his closest friends,
Only
only
2 come
one.
back.
Yeah, yeah. Well, 2 come back. One dies not too long after that, but yeah, um, almost everybody he went to school with, most of his friends, did not make it back. And that has a profound effect. That you're the person who comes back. I mean, my dad went through a similar thing. He was in Poland during the occupation, and by 1945, almost everybody he went to high school with, and his university friends, they were all dead. Um, and he his younger brother had died as well. And I don't think my dad ever really advanced in the world past 1939.
Mm.
You know, like that. A part of that whole generation went through that. Yeah,
There's the generations that go to war are still going through that.
exactly. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. We are seeing that reflected again and again. It's one of the. It's one of the lessons we, as a people, seem to refuse to learn. Um, but
It is the doom of men.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I wanted to add about, with Tahanu is that, uh, uh, you know, publishers were trying to get Le Guin to write, another, Earthsea book for years, for a couple of decades. They kept saying, we could sell that, we could really, we really do that. And she said, no, no, no. She didn't write that book until she was ready to write it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons it has such a deep resonance, and
She
why,
couldn't
in
have
some
written it
ways,
as a young woman.
yeah, and she wouldn't have just written it as a follow-up, as a sequel.
Yeah.
This is when she was ready to tell that story. That was, all right, okay, here we go, and the book really has that feeling. Yeah,
I think my favorite image in the whole novel is the fan. It's held up to
Burning.
the light.
mm,
Well, the
it's
thing
got-
that's cool is that it makes me think. There's a quote by, I think it was the Shinkoku too, but I can't remember it, so I'll skip it. But the idea that the other wind and Tales from Earthsea and Tihanu were written for the same children who read the first trilogy as children. It's like, here, okay, you've grown up now. I can give this to you.
Hey, this guy. That's what I did. Yeah.
It's funny when I was young and I read the first trilogy, and I got to the Tombs of Atuan. I'm reading through it trying to get where's Ged. Later on, when I went back and read it, I was older and I thought, this is the best of the 3 books. It really the writing is fantastic. But yeah, I still my favorite I'm sorry, my favorite scene is still from the first book when he tears the hole in time and space, right? When his pride opens up and brings through the shadow. When he's supposed to be, he's going to raise Elifaran from the dead, right? The most beautiful woman ever, and he gets attacked by his own shadow. So
it is an undermining of epic fantasy tropes even before there was a genre.
And one thing I'll throw in while we're at it is it's overlooked as one of the original great epic fantasy stories is The King of Elfland's Daughter. There's some writing in that book that's just lovely.
Lord Dunsany.
Yeah, it's the men of Earl in their ruddy coats appearing before their lord and Earl. I mean, it's the whole beginning is so great, and then the Elf King has to use his last power to make fairy and Earth become one. Hey, there's Bob.
Hi, Bob. Welcome back.
Back? Oh yeah, you can see when I had to leave. Hey, my sweet potato needed breakfast. Strawberries and cream and French toast.
Ooh, oh wow. Man!
Yeah. Oh, invite us over
for second breakfast.
Anytime.
Yeah, we're coming for second breakfast. Better put on another
Yeah.
pot of coffee.
Hey,
Hey,
it's
for
all
lemon
good.
juice.
I like Cheryl's comment. A benevolent despot is still a despot,
Mhm.
even if he's only a dictator on day one.
Right.
Uh,
A benevolent dictator on day one.
Does anyone else have the same problem as me when JD Vance talks? You have a temporary case of Tourette syndrome.
Yes.
I'm just, all I know, guys, is as I was listening off screen to this, I found it to be a fascinating conversation you guys are having. Um, Mostly Tolkien. Uh, but thank you for coming. Now, Andrew,
Yes.
I look forward to you being in the, getting your the book you're in with this published, Scott's Planet. I've only got, I think, 8 stories left to plug into that now. It's getting there. And then when I finally get Cliff's finalist, final,
No, I sent you the finalist, final. Version final 3. No irony.
yeah, I know, but I know that I'm going to send you the. Um, we're sending out page proofs probably Monday. I'm working on the cover this afternoon.
Nice.
Oh, Karen designed it. Karen did a wonderful job.
Then it's going to be a good cover.
Oh, Karen always does good covers. Um, she's she used to be kind of an art directory type person for things, and she
It
always
shows.
she has a unique talent ability to tell me when I'm wrong. Uh, and
That also shows.
no, it's actually I can almost tell she's doing most of the time. Uh, but the cover for Alt Truths, and as we'll be doing a reveal on the table of contents, but I can tell you this: when David Gerald writes you a story, and the title of it is "The Trouble with Dribbles," and there are Southern politicians involved, you just know that it's going to be a book worthy of that story. And he's not even the lead story in the anthology. Neither is Adam Troy Castro. Um, we They got great stories in there, and Cliff has got a great story. But we are. I am just. I don't think since Alternative Truths have I seen such a powerful run, or actually more Alternative Truths, seen such a quality run of stories in one place. Um, Except for when I did Bob Brown's Greatest Collection, I guess. That was a
Sure.
joke, guys.
Yeah.
Bob Brown has never done a collection. Um,
The world is waiting, Bob.
the world is waiting. Well, the world would never know if it was a Bob Brown collection because, um, and the you guys have been watching the comments from Alan Jan Shapiro over here. He's in one of the reasons why I say Southern Truth is going to be so good. We accepted stories over time, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there doing all the stories, and I say, why do we have 3 stories from this guy? Because he wrote 3 awesome, incredible stories. I mean, so when this thing comes out, the world is going to just, or when we get it out, maybe in the next couple of weeks, it's just
Woohoo.
we're thrilled to death, and Cliff can we'll toot Cliff's horn a little bit. He wrote something having to do with Memphis.
My
Uh,
hometown.
yeah, so it's all good, and I
And
thank
it
you,
is Elvis free Memphis.
Elvis Free Memphis. Yeah,
Yes, there's no
the
Elvis reference.
hey, do you guys remember the song? I know. He mentioned that I returned one of them because I said I can't put 3 of your stories in one book. But I'm going to buy that story if it's still available as soon as I got the book for it. But
Bob,
I'm coming.
if
I
you
know.
if you do another alternative war anthology, I'm gonna bury you with poems. I'll
Oh,
write you a story.
well, I'll tell
Is
you
that a
what.
threat
I'm
or a
going
promise?
to.
That's a promise.
Well, it's all going to be good. There's one fun thing about anthologies. And if you guys know what it is, tell me, because from the working end of it, it's hell.
It's watching. The fun thing about anthologies is watching you sweat bullets over them, Bob. It's a good
Well,
good spectator sport.
Andrew Lucas tells us we need more in the alternative series, but the next 2 books coming up
I'm
are
telling I'm telling you, Bob. Alternative concepts of a plan.
no. That's how anthologies get made. Anthologies come from having a concept of a plan. You put out the call. You read about half the stories, you realize your call was crap, and the stories you got were really for this call, which is a much better call. So you use those stories, and you wind up with an anthology that's nothing like you thought it was going to be, but it's really good.
Ah,
But
it's like concepts of a Plan 9 from outer space.
I saw that meme. Yeah, no, we're doing what we're
The
doing
sergeant's been killed, and somebody's to blame.
That's right.
is Evil Pets.
Oh, J.D. Vance's story.
Yeah.
Huh?
The J.D. Vance story. Trump's
No,
evil
that's
pet.
Evil
I gotta
Couch, the
admit,
J.D. Vance story.
there if somebody doesn't write me the story about J.D. Vance hiding in his hillbilly mansion as he hears the cats clawing at the windows,
It'd
you
be
know,
like Cats of
From the
Alfar.
Pet Cemetery or so.
I'll be disappointed. But it's just fun.
I
But
think
you
J.D.
guys,
Vance and Alfar is the story that needs to be written.
guys, they're all going to happen. But what I'm going to do is I'm focusing. We got 3 anthologies in the works. 2 of them are coming out within a month. I'm hoping, and the other one is I fired myself as editor and turned it over to Deborah Godfrey and Karen Anderson.
Smart move.
And they're going to tell me how it's going someday when they say you need to pay the writers.
So, Bob, get these books out because there's poetry in them, and Worldcon gets to have its own Hugo category. Every Worldcon gets to have a Hugo category if they want a Hugo category. And for next year's Worldcon, it's poetry.
It's what?
Poetry.
Yeah.
Politics.
So all the poetry, poems.
Poems.
So all the poems you publish in
What the hell is
2024
poetry? Oh, well, you know what?
are Hugo eligible.
We publish a lot of poetry, but that's because we got a lot of good poets. So
Hugo
if
eligible poets.
Then
Hugo
the
will be
poets
for
will
stories.
be able to get a Hugo for once. I think
We'll
it's a
have
marvelous
Evil
idea.
Pets will have to be the one with some poetry in it. More poetry, because it'll be published in the Hugo in the period of eligibility. But anyway, thank you all, Andrew. It's always a pleasure. Cliff, I'm going to chat with you about another idea I got, but I need to go let you guys go today, and I'll send you an email. And Rick, it's always good to see you come on board, and I'm glad we got you here a second time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
I had
and
a lot of
Andy.
fun.
I would write that. I have an open call somewhere. Is there an open call that it'll fit in? Oh, Andrew, if you're talking about the J.D. Vance cats clawing their
J.D.
way
Vance and
into his
Alfar.
hillbilly mansion, and he's in there with Granny, and he gets to play Jethro.
We should just use every Lovecraft title and insert J.D. Vance's name. JD Vance in the walls.
Yeah.
Hey, all I know
The
is
doom
Vance on the
that
wall.
came to
Oh,
J.D.
JD
Vance.
He's a hillbilly. Ellie Mae was a childless Catwoman, and it could be the revenge of Ellie Mae.
I
But
want to see JD Vance.
At the J.D. Vance of madness.
Yeah, I want to see him team up with Brown Jenkins or whatever.
and then there's also the other one that
As
we're
his running
doing,
mate.
and it could fit there too, is Retribution and Revenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be. I still think Trump's got about a 60 to 70% chance of winning this election, just on corruption alone. I mean, the states have had 4 years to purge over 1 million people off the voter rolls, the southern states. They've had ample opportunity to get their registrar, all of their people in charge, so that elections Trump loses don't get certified. I think, given the corruption factor, we may be looking forward to having to deal with that. And so the book that will put us all in prison is going to be Retribution and Revenge, True Tales of the Second Term of Donald Trump. But I will never put Trump's name on a cover. So you guys enjoy. And now go write me something.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
You
Thanks
too.
for asking me.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rich and Andy. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, wonderful audience. Have a
Oh, you
lovely
guys
day.
were. I was reading the comments. Rosebud, JD, Charles.